While you're turning there, I'll just give you a couple of announcements, and then we will get into it. Wednesday night is Wednesday night. We'll finish up Proverbs 20, looking forward to that. Friday is Ladies Bible Study, 4 p.m. All ladies are welcome to come to that. Also, on the 7th, next Sunday morning at Sunday school, we're going to be doing a Revelation study, starting that. Pray about that. Look forward to seeing everybody there that can make it. It'll be great. The 10th is the next midweek Italian night, 6 p.m. Bring something to go with Italian food, and that will be great. Lighthouse Mission is looking forward to getting back in it, at it. So 4:30 on the 20th, Brother Jim's leading that up. Sign up if you'd like to help serve the homeless in our community for an hour. It is a worthy mission. And August is coming around next month, and we'll be talking more about it. But next month, August, the third Saturday that we always use for mission night, it's going to be a special night that we did last year, where again we're going to cook the food. The church is going to prepare, and it's a great treat for the people. I hope you come to that one. I hope you can get involved in that one. Brother Jim's going to be smoking some meat, and it went great last year. The people were just so thankful for the special meal that was brought in, and it really is a great thing. So we'll have more about that next month. And then the 21st to the 24th, I need everybody to sign up that you can. Next Sunday night for VBS training. You will need to be here. We'll be going through during our service Sunday night, how to win somebody to the Lord. Did this last year, do it again. How to lead somebody to Christ. This is something that every Christian should know how to do, and we will speak on it in a way that you can explain it to a child, or help lead somebody to the Lord. And then after church, which I'll try to get it done early so we can get into it. We will have meetings. I want to start divvying out jobs so you can start thinking about what you're going to do, who's going to be in crafts, who's going to be in snacks, who's going to be in games, who's going to be in teaching, etc. And start getting people thinking along those lines and working together. Everybody did a fabulous job last year. I know it'll be the same this year. We'll make it work, and along the theme of camping. So also we will be going through on that one of two training nights. It's something that every single VBS worker will need to go through. If you don't go through this specific training, you cannot work in the child protective training on how to conduct yourself among children. Every person will need to go through it, just like last year, and sign a waiver that you accepted the training for legal purposes. It's just something we have to do, and it's something that needs to be talked about, and we're going to go through that. So please let me know if you have any questions. It's going to be a great VBS, but it is coming quickly. It's coming quickly. All right, Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. I love these verses. I just love these verses. I could harp on these verses. You know, I used to preach out a little bit more than I do now. Of course, there was a time when all I did was preach out. I never consistently preached, and so it wasn't 10 years ago, before 10 years ago, if I preached a message, the chances of me re-preaching that message were about 100%. Rarely do I ever re-preach a message. Very rarely do I get the opportunity to re-preach a message, because who wants to hear Pastor Dustin preach the same message twice? Nobody does. I may talk about I may talk about it, but rarely do I get a chance. And in these verses here, these are re-preachable for me. What do I mean? Sometimes I preach a message and I say, I'm going to keep that one. Well, I'm going to keep that one for a rainy day. If I get a chance to preach that one, I'm going to do that one. And that's how I feel about this passage of Scripture. We've talked about this faith of Moses thing for the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to put a cap on it tonight. But we have seen really three ideas in the life of Moses. Verse 23 of Hebrews 11, faith preserves life. Faith preserves life. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. So here we see, again, this faith led to Moses' parents allowing him to be protected enough to live to become the Redeemer who he would be. And also, we understand that faith preserves life. Last week we saw faith ponders life. I love this. Verse 24, it's about the choice of identity. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. It's about the choice of involvement. Verse 25, choosing rather to suffer the affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. It's about the choice of investment. Verse 26, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than all the treasures of Egypt, for he had recompense, respecting to the recompense of the reward. Today we get into the third point. Okay, faith preserves life. Faith ponders life. And then lastly, in the life of Moses, faith permeates life. The word permeate means to pass through something. The aroma of the fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen permeates the air. I love that. There was a time, there was a time, it is often that Katie will be preparing a roast for Sunday, and she will use it, she will prepare it in the crock pot. And so she'll put the roast in the crock pot on Saturday night and start that thing. And so you will be dreaming about roast all night long on Saturday night and Sunday morning. That's it, because you can smell it in your sleep. The dog gets up and pants and paces, smelling, because the smell of the roast is permeating the air. Okay, those are very strong memories, subconsciously and consciously remembered. The artist's unique style seemed to permeate every brushstroke, creating a cohesive narrative within the painting. The man's speech was designed to permeate hope and optimism among the audience. This word permeate means to cross over, to pass through something. Now, what I want to get across to us today and look at is that the faith Moses had completely passed through his life from beginning to end. It had completely taken over who he was. And I want us to consider the benefit of how faith can pass through and affect not just the life of Moses, but your life. Now, in this passage of Moses, verse 23 through 28, 27 is my favorite verse. I love it. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. For he endured as seeing him who is invisible. There is what I'm calling the heavenly perspective. He endured as seeing him who is invisible. And because he had that heavenly perspective, that led him to a holy practice. Look at verse 28. Through faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Permeation of faith. Now, let's look at this, okay? Heavenly perspective that leads to a holy practice. This is just rubber meets the road that we need to be reminded of. Now, let me just walk through verse 27 and break it down for you. Number one, in the heavenly perspective, I see an unapologetic attachment here. An unapologetic attachment in verse number 27. By faith, he forsook Egypt. He left it behind. He abandoned Egypt. He said, I'm out of here, boys. I ain't playing with y'all no more. I'm gone. Now, forsaking Egypt here is a loaded phrase. And we saw similar wordage last week in verse number 24. We've already read it. By faith, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. We saw a similar thing here. The main thought here last week about verse 24 still applies here in verse 27. You need to refuse to be defined by what hinders you. What hinders your walk from the Lord, you need to forsake and walk away with. If something is getting in between your calling and your walk with Jesus, step away from it, refuse it, forsake it. And this is what was going on. Now, we must be willing to break from things that are not helping us in this life. And some of those things that are not helping us are not necessarily evil in of themselves. Okay? They're not necessarily, they don't mean necessarily to be evil, but if it's slowing you down from walking with Jesus, you need to get rid of it. Okay? And these can be evil practices, and these can be good practices that are not considered evil. I draw your attention to chapter 12 and verse 1. We'll get here soon enough, but this puts it well. Wherefore, seeing we are compassed with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us. Notice the distinction between sin that easily besets us and what is called a weight. What do you mean by a weight? He's meaning something that weighs you down, that is not necessarily defined as sin. Okay? Sometimes our hobbies can weigh us down because they distract us from doing what we need to do with Jesus. All right? So take that into consideration. We need to be willing to forsake those things that are affecting our walk and our calling and not look back to them. There are some things that we just can't do anymore. They may be fine for somebody else, but who we are, we have to be able to evaluate ourselves. We have to know who we are and our weaknesses and know that I cannot get involved with that and walk away and not look back. And to those ideas of looking back, I will quote the words of Jesus. Remember Lot's wife. What happened when Lot's wife looked back to the things that she had left, that she was supposed to forsake? She turned into a pillar of salt. There is something to looking back and trying and not fully forsaking the things which God has called us to forsake. Unapologetic attachment. Number two, we see in this heavenly perspective that there needs to be an undaunted defiance. Verse 27 says also, not fearing the wrath of the king, not being frightened, alarmed, or put in awe of the fear of the king. This is the same word as afraid spoken of Moses' parents in verse 23, when they said they were not afraid of the king's commandment. And notice that. That's an important connection. Just like Moses' parents were not afraid of the king, Moses himself had to learn to be not afraid of the king. Same king. So this idea of passing on spiritual traits to your children and to the next generation is increasingly important. No coincidence that Moses had to make the same decisions his parents made 40 years later. Moses was not fearing the wrath of the king. Now, we don't think about this too much, but I think this is worth noticing. I believe this was Moses' main deterrent and main reason not to walk away. It appears that there was a time when Moses grew up and he had to decide if I want to forsake Egypt and identify with the people of Israel. And what was the main thing that was holding him? What was the main concern that was weighing his decision? And I think it was the fear of the king. Now think about this. We here in America spend a lot of time talking about our obsession with the royal family, which has been around for generations and generations. We understand this. Now, if you ever pay attention to the royal family and what they have to go through, is it easy being a royal? Is it easy being in the family of the King of England? Is that something that we're all just waiting to sign up for? We kind of look at that, and while it's nice and it's elegant, and there are moments there that are really neat, and there's history there and all that sort of stuff, I don't think any of us want to be involved in the royal family. I think I'd rather be, living in a trailer park on the backside of nowhere than to be in the royal family and have to put up with all that political pressure. When you sneeze, they talk about it. When you cough, they talk about it. They watch you. Now, Moses is not in the British royal family, but he was in the Egyptian royal family. And I think the pressure was just as high for him. Could you imagine being in that mindset? And here's Moses, okay? He's growing up in a royal family situation. And is he Egyptian? No, he's Hebrew. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. You can look at him and tell a difference between him. He's not an Egyptian, he's a Hebrew, all right? That's already drawing lines and that's already creating controversy. Because the people that he belongs to, what is their status as humans? They are slaves. Oh, we got a problem here. And there had to be conversations in public, there had to be conversations in private about Moses' relationship with his people as a Hebrew, and probably what held him back from stepping forward all those years, he was afraid of what the king would do if he stepped out there. Can you imagine that? We don't think about that too much. But there was a lot of public and there was a lot of personal pressure on Moses because he was the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the adopted son. And he had to make sure that he didn't do something to upset the apple cart of the royal family, if you will. He would become a political liability. But there came a point where the word of God became more important than the word of Pharaoh. It came a point where it was more important what God thought than what Pharaoh thought. And when Moses came to that point, he said, like Peter said in Acts chapter 5, we ought to obey God rather than men. And he made that choice. He had an undaunted defiance. Can I just say, beware of the fear of man? Beware of the fear of man. It is one of the deepest snares that can lodge into us where we get afraid what somebody's going to say, what somebody's going to think. And don't get me wrong, we should consider our testimony. Nobody should ever say, I don't care what anybody thinks, because we do have a testimony to factor into that. We do have a testimony for the Lord, and we do have to make sure that we walk in a way that does not hinder him. But at the same time, the other side of that coin is the fear of man, worrying too much what man thinks to the point where it hinders our walk with God, is an old trick of the devil. And if he can get you worried about more what man thinks than what God thinks, he may just paralyze you in this battle for the souls of men. It says in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25, the fear of man bringeth a snare. It's a trap. But whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be saved. Notice how the fear of man is contrasted with trusting the Lord. And that's exactly it. If you are fearing man, you are not trusting God. If you are trusting God, you are not fearing man. They are diametrically opposed. So here's Moses with his heavenly perspective. I have an unapologetic attachment to Egypt. I have an undaunted defiance towards the wrath of the king. And verse 27 also says, I have an unwavering dedication, for he endured. He endured. To be strong, to be steadfast, to be patient. What did he endure? Well, at this point, it was the public pressure of the king of breaking away and going out there and being around his people. And that's how this started. This specifically at this moment is talking about Moses' decision to break away. This is, I think this is before the folly of the killing the Egyptian. He was out there among the people, getting to know them. I don't care what Pharaoh thinks. I'm going to be out here around my people who are slaves, the people of the Lord, and I'm going to be around them and watch over them, and I'm going to do what I can to help them. I don't care. I'm going to endure all the talk. I'm going to endure all the pressure. I'm going to just keep going, is what he was doing. This would be nothing compared to the public pressure he would later face as the leader of Egypt. Okay? This is not talking about that. This is the beginnings of it. The public pressure as a man of Pharaoh's court, it was the training ground for the pressure he would face as the leader of Israel out of Egypt. And he would never have arrived at the place where God wanted him to as leader of the Exodus if he didn't learn how to patiently endure the wrath of the king. While we go through things that are difficult now here on earth, they are preparing us. Okay? They are preparing us for something greater. Now, we've all lived enough life so far. Okay? And when we look back at the past of what we have endured, do you know that what you have endured in this life is supposed to be strengthening you for what you are enduring now? Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we get down and we're in a situation and we forget everything we've been through. Listen, I don't care what you're going through, you've probably been through worse before. And what God allowed you to go through in the past was preparing you for what you're going through now. Okay, so be aware of that. God is trying to make you a person of endurance. This is not a marathon. I'm sorry, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is a race that is going to be run until the day we die. That's just how this is. We have to endure. We have to keep going. If we fall down, we have to get back up. 2 Timothy 2:3. Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. We are all soldiers here. Keep fighting. James 1:12. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation. For when he is tried, he shall receive a crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. Don't quit. Don't give up. Don't turn in. I know it's hard. Let's not pretend it's not. It's going to be day in and day out. It's at times that are inopportune. It is pressure beyond pressure. We understand that. But God can give us the strength to endure. Now notice this. If you don't have an attachment and you're struggling with defiance and this fear problem, you're really going to struggle with endurance. And that's the power of this passage. It builds, it builds, it builds. If you're struggling with forsaking the world and caring about what man thinks, you're really going to be struggling with endurance. Don't expect it. So if you feel like you're really tired and struggling with endurance, ask yourself, how am I doing with forsaking? How am I doing with the fear? And this will tell us how we're doing with endurance. Now notice this, verse 27, here's the best part, the unseen dependence. The unapologetic attachment, the undaunting defiance, the unwavering dedication, and the unseen dependence in verse 27. He endured as seeing him who is invisible. The word seeing here means to discern. It means to experience. It means to attend. It means to perceive. Now this verse is amazing. This part of the verse is amazing when you consider what it says in Hebrews 11:1. What does it say of faith in Hebrews 11:1? Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is the evidence of things that we can't see. And then if you consider also what it says in verse 13. It says, speaking of, the children of Israel and the promise, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. Can we see promises? Having seen them afar off, they were persuaded of them. They were embraced them. They confessed them that were strangers and pilgrims of the earth. And you look at Hebrews 12:2, looking unto Jesus. How can I see Jesus? How can I look unto Jesus? Well, what is that talking about? So these ideas of seen and not seen. I love how they put it here in verse number 27. Seeing him who is invisible. How do I do that? Can I do that? Seeing him who is invisible? Yes. How is that possible? In a verse that you know very well. Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not to thy own understanding. In all thy ways, what? Acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. You know what that word acknowledge means there in Proverbs 3:6? In all thy ways, acknowledge him. What does that mean to acknowledge someone? If somebody were to walk in the room here and I didn't look at them, I just ignored them, I wouldn't be acknowledging them. Acknowledge means to see them and to draw attention to them and to, I see you, yes. If somebody is at a restaurant, let's say in Terre Haute, and they're sitting there and somebody tries to get your attention and you don't want to look at this, you're not acknowledging. I'm ignoring you. The difference. To acknowledge is one thing, and the opposite of that is to ignore. Well, when you trust in the Lord, you don't ignore him, you acknowledge him. In all thy ways, I'm acknowledging him. The word acknowledge in the Hebrew, I love this. It means this. Let me read it. The word acknowledge means to know, to ascertain by seeing, to recognize. To recognize. This idea, I am seeing God without seeing him. How am I doing that? I'm acknowledging him. I'm acknowledging that he's there. I am seeing him who is invisible. And when you are doing that, you are trusting in the Lord. you are trusting in the Lord. Moses here, when it says he was seeing him who is invisible, he was living Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 before there was a Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. He knew that God was there even though he couldn't see him. Is that possible? Yes. There are ways to ascertain that God is there without using your eyes, without using your ears, without using your senses. And Moses was just living his life like God was standing right there, even though he couldn't see him. That is what true faith does. God was calling him to serve the people, and the way that he did that was with a heavenly perspective. I'm going to follow God, even though I cannot see where he's going and exactly see what he's saying. I am just going to keep following what I know the word of the Lord is. And when he did that, everything changed. Moses did it that way. David said it this way in Psalm 16:8. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. I have set the Lord always before me. I choose to put him in my field of vision, spiritually speaking. Faith is seeing God without using your eyes. How was he able to do that? Because he forsook evil, not fearing the wrath of the king. He endured as seeing him who is invisible. Again, if you are struggling with the forsaking and the fear, you're going to have a hard time with the endurance and the seeing him who is invisible. Faith is seeing God without using your eyes. Now, I think every single one of us have been there before. But even to us who are seasoned Christians and have experienced this, we all know that there are times when God shows up and says, all right, how about this scenario? And he tries it. Are you going to continue to see me when this upsets you? How are you going to do this way? You know, I'm fascinated with history, especially in the 1960s, whenever the Mercury astronauts were trained. Have you ever heard about the Mercury 7 astronauts? Fabulous, interesting. I love old school NASA, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo history. These guys that literally sat on the tip of a rocket and went up into space. That is cool, all right? And they're about ready to do it again with the Artemis project. Really, very soon they're going to be sending people back to the moon, or are they sending people back to the moon? We'll find out, right? They're going to be sending people back to the moon. But when they had the first 7 Mercury astronauts, okay, they sent out the call that we are looking for the best of the best of the best. And they had some 500 applicants, I don't know exactly how many, that came and said, yes, we want to be an astronaut. And they whittled it down from that several hundred to 7. Okay? And some of you may have been watching and know those names like John Glenn, Alan Shepard, all these guys that came through that process. You know what they had to go through to be able to become an astronaut? I mean, they tested these guys' limits physically, mentally, emotionally. I mean, they would literally put them in centrifuges. You know what a centrifuge is? When you're doing like this, and make them do algebra equations and all sorts of stuff. Every single thing. And they had to be able to do the hardest intellectual problems under the highest pressures. And you look at what these astronauts went through to become an astronaut, it was not an easy feat. They threw everything possible at them, and it whittled it down to these 7 men. Are they really good? Are they really good? And these 7 men were the best of the best of the best. That if they got in a situation in outer space where their capsule was doing this, they would remember and by reflex know what to do to get out. You know, sometimes God, it feels like he's doing that sort of training with us. And we feel like we're in a centrifuge. We're in a scenario that he is testing our limits. Will you continue to see him who is invisible, no matter what the situation is? Don't think
that once I get to a certain level, that it's all going to be easy from here. That's not. You will continue to be tested. Will you see him as who is invisible? Are you still forsaken? Are you still fighting that fear factor against man? Are you still enduring? Are you still seeking? The heavenly perspective, which leads to the holy practice. I will not spend as much time on this verse. Look at verse 28. The heavenly perspective made the holy practice so much easier. So when Moses had went through all that, when he came to this, it was just a little bit easier. Notice the unique precept here in verse 28. Through faith, he kept the Passover. There's the unique precept. Notice the unusual procedure and the sprinkling of blood. And then, because of that, he had the undeniable protection. Thus, he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Notice this, okay? The unique precept. Never before had this been initiated. The first time the Passover was ever done was through Moses. This was a brand new thing. Exodus chapter 12, we see the instructions starting out, and they are brand spanking new to everybody. And it's completely unique. Okay, Moses, here's what you need to do. On the 10th day of the month of Nisan, you need to get yourself a lamb. You need to put it in the household. Make sure it's without blemish. Make sure it's without spot. And then on the 14th day, you need to slaughter that lamb. And then you need to prepare the lamb. You need to roast it over a fire. And you need to make sure that the bones are not broken during the preparation. And then you need to have the feast of unleavened bread and bitter herbs alongside the roasted lamb. Unleavened bread, no leaven in the house, all these sort of things, all right? This is not normal, okay? This was not anything new. He was having to present this to the people, but he was coming into this unique precept, and you know what? I got this one. My perspective is where it is, so the practice is nothing. The practice is nothing. I mean, we can do this. The unusual procedure, it came to the sprinkling of blood. You sprinkle the blood of the slain lamb on the doorposts, and then you eat it in readiness, fully dressed, with your sandals on and with your rod in your hand, ready to go. And because we're leaving tonight, could you imagine explaining this to those people? All right, I got around everybody. All right, I want you to take a lamb, and I want you to put it in your house for 4 days and watch it, make sure it's without spot and blemish. I mean, and could you just imagine the question with many people? Could you just imagine the question? Well, what if it has a ear? You know, what if it just kind of turns? You know, all the questions. And you have to do this and sprinkle the blood. Sprinkle the blood over the doorpost. Are you serious? What are you talking about? Listen, if you do that, the death angel is going to pass over, and it's not going to. What are you talking about? But then what? Because the heavenly perspective had been accepted in the people. Where did that come from? Well, we've seen 9 good plagues. When it got to the 10th plague and sprinkling the blood, I think it was much easier for them to accept what was going on because their holy perspective had changed. The first 9 plagues had allowed them to see the invisible. That way, when Moses said, all right, guys, here's the new plan, and it's not ABC, it's kind of ABC all the way to Z, it's kind of long. And they all did it to a T because their perspective was right. Their perspective was right. And because their perspective was right and their practice was right, they had a protection that was amazing. The firstborns of Israel were all protected. God stepped in a way that was never seen before. We know that this became what's known as the Lord's Supper in the New Testament era, which embodies Christ as that lamb who would die on behalf of mankind, and if you would simply allow that blood not to be applied to the doorpost, but to the doorpost of your heart, you could be protected from death as well. Wonderful picture. And while it doesn't make sense, may not have made sense to them in the moment, why are we doing this? Here, as we look back, it makes perfect sense now why God did it that way. And I've said this before, sprinkling the blood over the doorpost would, in a sense, make a cross. You would sprinkle it, boom, boom, and boom, and it would drip down. It would make a cross. It makes perfect sense. Now, but for them, it makes much sense. They didn't have the New Testament and the whole Scripture based on. All they had was some guy who started giving these orders. But because their perspective was right, they were able to do things and accept things as holy practice. Heavenly perspective leads to holy practice. Now, what's more important? Sometimes people try to put practice before the perspective, and that brings frustration and upset, and I don't know why is this going on, all these sort of things. You can take a child, you can take a teenager, and you strap them with holy rules, they're not going to get it. Not that you shouldn't try, but understand that they may not get it. Until their perspective changes, the practice will not truly be there. So the main thing is, how's our perspective? Are we forsaken? Are we feared? Are we enduring? Are we seeing him who is invisible? Tonight, let us evaluate, because God might be putting you in the centrifuge and asking you to do trigonometry tomorrow. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for that? You never know what the day may bring forth. Let us humbly remember. And there are times when I go back to this verse often. This is a verse that I often rely on to get me through. He is good at seeing him who is invisible. Okay, God, I don't understand. I'm just going to follow you the best I know how. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. You know you understand. In all thy ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct. Father, tonight we're thankful to be in your house. We're thankful to look at the life of Moses over the past 3 weeks. As we close this chapter of his life, we just pray that you would help us to learn and to apply the things which we have heard. Lord, we do not know what's going to happen. And Lord, things are hard. I pray for grace in every situation that's represented in this church, whether the folks are present or not. Every single situation, may there be grace applied, and may you give us mercy to endure and to see. Lord, if there's a forsaking and a fear problem, may we acknowledge that, and may we release those weights and the sins which that so easily beset us. Give us patience to run the race. Lord, give us heavenly perspective as only you can. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thanks for being here tonight. You are dismissed. Have a fabulous, fabulous week. Let us know if you can do anything.